We have an amazing panel for this session. It's a focus on South America, and we have leading experts from the LATAM market specifically come over for this event. So it's going to be discussing pre-regulated and regulated markets. So I'd like to welcome to the stage Ramiro Atucha, CEO of Vibra Gaming, Witoldo Hendrich, founding partner of Hendrich, Advogados, and Thomas Carvalhaes, MD of VaideBob.
Esquerda no meio.
Okay.
Where do you want to sit?
Probably here, and I have, yeah? Makes sense?
As you wish.
Perfect. Okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks very much, iGaming NEXT, for inviting us here, allowing us to be a part of this panel. My name is Ramiro Atucha. I've been on the gambling industry for more than 15 years. Right now with Vibra Gaming, a content and platform supplier specialized in LATAM. Before that, I co-founded Leander Games in 2007 as content provider for the general regulated market and platform supplier after that. I'm from Argentina. I live in Spain. So I had the opportunity to assess and know LATAM first as supplying on the regulated markets in Europe, but being from LATAM, and now as a supplier in LATAM. I have the pleasure of being here with two big experts in LATAM in different areas. We have Witoldo, expert in law in Brazil, and Mr. Carvalhaes, did I pronounce it well?
Yeah.
That have done a lot in LATAM on the operations side, on the supplier side. So I think it would be a great idea if each of you gave a brief introduction of what you've done and your experience.
All right. Thank you, Ramiro, for the intro. Thank you, Niam and iGaming NEXT for having us here. It's good to be here, although, like some of you might know, I made it here, coming all the way from Brazil after a very intense week, and my luggage didn't make it, but you know what? We're alive and we're here. Let's push forward. I'm Thomas Carvalhaes, born and raised in Brazil, although I consider myself to be half South African as well because I lived there for many years. I've started many B2C operations in Brazil and in Latin America as well. I can mention some of them, the likes of BetMotion in Mexico, Leo Vegas in Brazil, Chile, Peru, Amuleto Bet for Hero Gaming in Brazil, and now I'm working as a managing director for VaideBob, which uses the amazing sports in tech platform. So yes, we're pushing forward, trying to get the best we can out of Brazil as a market, which is as much as it's a very potential market, it's full of challenges, which we're gonna dive into it as well. But it's great to be here. Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. My luggage didn't arrive also. I sleep with this.
Mine did.
Yeah, as boring lawyers, I sleep with this. So, I am a lawyer as a profession for more than 20 years. In 2013, two American crazy guys invited me to build a payment method in Brazil. So I am a lawyer, and I also operate payments in Brazil for gambling specifically since 2014. So it's a long journey. That said, I can navigate a little bit on legal side, something related to payment. Because of this, I started to understand a little bit of gambling. Doesn't mean that I know something reliable, because we don't have a regulation in Brazil. So what I know about gambling maybe is contaminated by this unregulated situation. But let's try to answer some questions today.
Brilliant. So we're going to try to cover two big elements within the LATAM aspect. One is the regulated countries, or very newly regulated markets, as Colombia, that is kind of a leading case that we're keen to analyze and take as an example in many aspects. The other one is Argentina. Argentina has slowly started to regulating state by state, with a lot of challenges, not only on the regulation side, but also on the macroeconomics, on the money flow, imports, exports, etc. You know, we tend to create a big chaos in Argentina from time to time. We're in another one at the moment. And then analyze the ones that are regulating or in process or close to regulate. I've been in the industry almost 20 years, and since the beginning, Brazil has been about to regulate, about to come with a regulation. It's been 20 years, and we're still almost there. So it's a big challenge for everyone because it's a very interesting market. Then we've got Peru, we've got Chile, we've got different markets that are in the process of coming to regulation. And it would also be very interesting to look at what happened in the other longer-standing regulated markets like Europe and what have been the elements. And in my opinion, there are a few elements that have to be taken into account. First is the cultural differences between, what a platform or content does in the more experienced markets as Europe versus countries with less mature players like LATAM. Then the cultural differences. And then, of course, the limitations and the struggles in regulating. I mean, even in Europe now, that we have had regulation for such a long time, banking is still an issue. Imagine, guys, in LATAM, right? So I think it would be interesting. You have, Thomas, you have experience with operations in many countries, including Colombia that has regulated. How did you feel with that process? How did that process go? And which are the elements that you think should be an element to be considered or taken as an example, and which ones you think are not a good example, right?
Thank you, Ramiro. Amazing, very good question. I just want to make a quick comment here. As you mentioned Brazil, about to regulate, I just always like to look at the audience and see everybody nodding and laughing.
We've been there.
Which is embarrassing. We're getting there. I just want to stick to Ramiro's question for now. Yeah, look, the first thing, and I know it might sound cliche to most of you. You probably heard that, but I really want to make sure that we all get this and we understand this when we think about Latin America. There's no such a thing as a LATAM market. That doesn't exist. Just as much as you can say there's no such thing as an European market, because when it comes to Europe, we take the markets very serious. We take Netherlands as a market, Sweden as a market, Germany as a market, and so on. So I think one of the number one mistakes that foreign operators do when they go into LATAM is, okay, let's go into LATAM. What the heck is LATAM? You know, we have Brazil, Argentina, Peru, Colombia. We have pre-regulated, post-regulated markets. It's much more complex. It's much more complex than that. Regarding Colombia, and I think Ramiro started in the right foot there, because Colombia, for me, as an operator, is the best example of what must be done in the other countries in Latin America. Why? Because first, you have your target audience, as in the population with a very high propensity to gamble. You have more than 80% internet penetration in the country. Colombia is a technology hub for Latin America. I don't know if all of you guys know, but the city of Medellin, for instance, makes for the best developers and tech people in Latin America. So fantastic market, very highly educated people, highly skilled people. And then when it comes to the market per se, we have a regulation that's clear. There's no way you can get tangled up when it comes to regulation in Colombia. Why? Because it's clear. You pay 16%, you serve your product there, you pay 16% taxes to the government and to Cojuegos, and you can explore. Mostly online, sports betting and gambling as well. And most of the operators that I know there, they're very happy with the results. The few months that I lived in Medellin, in Colombia were amazing. I then moved on to another mission in Mexico, which maybe we can touch base on that as well. But as a regulated market, I think Colombia is the best example. And I'm sorry, I know you're Argentinian. There is a bit of a rivalry there between Brazil and Argentina, and I mean this the nicest way. But I don't think the regulation in Argentina has done the best way it could have done. I don't think regulation in Mexico has been done the best way it could have been done. So if there's operators or investors here interested in regulated markets in Latin America, for sure, we can chat about this anytime, but for sure, Colombia, for me, is the best example and the best market to be invested in.
Perfect.
If I may.
Of course.
Two comments about what you said, Thomas. Number one, it's not only a matter of making the appropriate difference between what we have in Latam, the different countries, but also in terms of language. When you look to Brazil, I see lots of websites translating to Portuguese from Portugal. I have lots of friends in Portugal, and I usually say that the official Portuguese of the world is the Brazilian Portuguese. We are 220 million, so that's the official.
Fair.
But yeah, fair, right? But the point is, for example, my owner's guide of my motorcycle was translated to Portuguese from Portugal. I went back to the dealer and changed for the English version because I had to translate so many terms that I'm not used in Portuguese from Portugal, and it was not seamless for me to read the owner's guide. So simple thing. And when we look to websites with words that are appropriate in Portugal but not in Brazil, most of the Brazilian audience, they think that website is not reliable. Usually people don't click it. They close and go to somewhere else. So it's not only a matter to make the difference between countries, but also if you want to go to Brazil or do something there, you got to localize according to our language, which is Portuguese Brazil, something like this.
Yeah, I still recall being in Argentina watching him. I think it was an X-Men movie, right? And they said, here we are. It said Miramar, Argentina, and it was mountains. Miramar is a beach. And it was an Argentinian bar, but there was Spanish music. Can happen, but with the mountains on the beach, that was a bit strange. And then the bartender shows up and he says, hey, cabrón, he's very Mexican. And we were all cracking, so we really need to take localization serious, have it checked with someone at the different countries. And I also agree on what's being done. There are some interesting elements to consider in both Colombia and Argentina. First, Argentina is state-by-state regulation, just as the US. Now, the problem that we have is we do not have states like the US. In Argentina, you probably have like 3 or 4, maybe 5 states that are worth considering entering into a license. The rest really aren't. I mean, very low population, very low income. So it's going to be very challenging on that area. And we even have the crazy situation of Provincia and Ciudad of Buenos Aires, which is very difficult to isolate or to separate or geolocate, which have 2 different licenses. So that is a challenge itself. In the case of Colombia, what has been very interesting is that the lead has been taken by local operators. You have between BetPlay and WPlay, they have most of it. The struggle, of course, is with the rest. The rest are left with very little. But you're beginning to see companies like Rush Street Interactive coming in there with a lot more experience than the locals and beginning to slowly catch up. So locals need to be careful with their software, their product offering, their marketing, etc. Because there's a new player in town, and they're beginning to do some good and some right things. I wanted to ask you, Witoldo, I'm sure that in looking at the regulation for Brazil, you know what's potentially coming, what you would like, etc. Which elements have you considered from what happened in Colombia, what's happening in Argentina? Which elements would you like to see reflected in the law, and which ones you think are likely to happen, if that's something you can venture on?
Well, the way Colombia regulated is pretty clear, which is good. It's something that we should copy. What doesn't fit in the Colombia situation is we have a payment operation in Colombia. but we don't have any gambling clients in Colombia. So whatever we process in terms of payments in Colombia is not related to gambling for one reason. Everybody that come to us saying, can we process in Colombia? Man, for some reason, they don't get bank accounts in Colombia, right? So this is something that we had a public hearing at the Congress a couple of years ago, and with this line of thinking, I was saying, look, if it is an agenda of the country, so let's regulate gambling, let's make revenue out of it, let's control, let's protect the players. So it's a country agenda. You need to go to the banks and say, hey, let me remind you, you operate under a license issued by our central bank. So it is our agenda. I want you to cooperate with this agenda and open bank accounts. So this is something that doesn't fit in the Colombian reality, but I think it's kind of sorted out in Brazil, not because of an action of the government. But we have a big gambling show in São Paulo a couple of days ago. And differently than in the past, we were approached at our stand by 6 different banks wanted our operation. So in the past, we used to say, well, maybe it's not appropriate to mention gambling to a big bank or something like this. Man, they want the business. Yeah. So now it's not a matter of the government trying to do something, but I imagine that this is something that Colombia should do. If they want to regulate gambling as an agenda of the country, something that is a nationwide interest, they need to find a way to cooperate, right? So this is something that I would like to see in Brazil, better regulation, but also if I could give some opinion in Colombia, I would say, look to what we have in Brazil. The banks, they want the business, so you got to do the same there.
Adding something to that, I think that the main problem there is that whenever it is gambling related, of course the standards in checks and controls against anti-money laundering, terrorism financing, etc., all of that goes through the roof. And I think it's also a matter of some banks just not wanting to deal with that. Now, we need to make it interesting as a market, and of course the government need to execute and put some pressure to the banks. As soon as we have a couple of banks happy to operate with us and we start generating good numbers and showing good practices, I'm sure it will turn around. Same thing is happening looking to Brazil with all the regulation. Now we're having some state regulating, and I am hopeful that what happened in Colombia is now showing numbers. Some states are going to start showing numbers in Brazil, and hopefully that will attract the rest of the states and even at the federal level. It's very interesting what you have in Brazil. Some parts are state by state, like the lotteries and sports betting, I believe. Yeah. And then you have at the federal level some other elements, right?
Yeah, it is a big... Are you going to answer that?
I can, but he can go.
I can
ask.
You can say and he'll contradict afterwards.
Yeah, okay, all right. It is a big mistake and a problem created by the bad chosen of words.
Yep.
When they came with the provisional measure that became the law that regulates sports betting in Brazil, it's not sports bet as we know worldwide. They call it lottery of fixed odds. So words, they have meanings. And when you choose one that they have one specific meaning, you attract to it the good and the bad around that meaning. So they choose the word lottery. Okay, cut the scene here. In parallel, we had an old law case at the Supreme Court from some states that they wanted to have their own lottery operations, and it was under a federal exclusivity system. So Supreme Court decided that it shouldn't be an exclusive service of the federal government, that every public entity could have it. So in theory, it's not a matter of states, but theoretically, every city could have their own lottery, right? But okay, but let's
Crazy.
Let's try to make it simple and talk about states. So then the states decided to have their own lotteries. All right, what we have in terms of lottery? Wow, a lottery of fixed odds on sports events. And then now we say that, well, Brazil is regulating sports bets state by state. Yeah, no.
Maranhão came out.
Yes, they want to regulate their lotteries, and the word chosen by the government in 2018 to define sports bet was lottery. So because of this bad chosen of the word lottery, now everybody can have their own state lottery, which includes what we know as sports betting.
Yes. So we've been victims of ambiguity in a way, because I'm just going to take the lead from what Witoldo said. Because back in 2018, former Brazilian president, which wasn't even a president, he became a president after Dilma was impeached. I'll take one. Come on, one. So, and he signed a decree legalizing sports betting, lottery, and games of skill. So back then, Caixa, which is a Brazilian bank, Caixa is a Portuguese word for box, but it's one of the Brazilian state-owned banks. They had the monopoly for lotteries in the entire country. That was the condition back then. A few months or years later, that monopoly has been taken by the state, has been taken away from them, and then the states have been given the autonomy to run their lotteries on their state the way they wish. So this is kind of crashing now against the expectation of Brazil having a national sports betting. And then I mean sports betting, the pure sports betting, not fixed quota, not as in sports lottery. Because in Brazil, the lotteries and the lotto houses, they used to sell sports betting as a lotto game. It's fixed quota. You can only place that bet on the final result, and that's it. You can't change. There's no live odds. There's no dynamic odds. That's the difference. But then now, the Brazilian states, they've just taken their chances. And now they're beginning to advertise, you know what? The state of Maranhão is now issuing licenses. But they're taking a chance because they're issuing licenses for lotto operations, which now, based on the breach, on the gap that the government gave them, they can also explore sports betting. But they're not exploring sports betting as in fixed quota. They're exploring everything, which is makes a bigger mess. I understand it's hard for you guys to understand if you're not Brazilian. For us Brazilians, it's hard to understand.
If you're Brazilian, you can't.
In summary, we need a national level, a regulation on national level for sports betting. That's what we're waiting. Some states are doing this on the state level, but we don't know if that's going to stand the moment a national regulation comes. They're beginning to sell that idea. They're pushing it forward. Maranhão, São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, if I'm not mistaken. Paraná as well. But we don't know how legal that is. We don't know how much that's going to stand. So me, as an operator, and a Brazilian, this is my position, okay? Don't take my word as a final word here, but I don't consider the current state of affairs in Brazil to be final. I think there's going to be a much stronger workforce on a national level that's probably going to revoke everything that's been done so far. It's probably going to enforce the current PL, which it was a PM, provisional measure. Now they changed over to a project of law. Witoldo will go into that because he is more involved in the politics than I. But in a nutshell, that's the situation there. And we're not even talking games of chance. We're not even talking RNG games, not gambling. We're only talking sports betting, which is unfortunately complicated. And that's why I was laughing. When I saw everybody doing this for Brazil, because it is a bit of a soap opera, really, unfortunately. It keeps going back and forth, and Peru is probably going to regulate before us, just copying the Colombian model, but fantastic the work that they're doing in Peru. I think they passed the law already, if I'm not mistaken, but they didn't enforce it yet.
Yeah, they're still discussing it and reviewing it, but it looks like it's going to come earlier. Now, there was something interesting about Brazil. There was a law issued a couple of years ago allowing sports betting at the national level, if I'm not mistaken, but no regulation was done. So that was taken, and I've heard some of your colleagues, Witoldo, basically saying, guys, it is legal. You can open up a sports book here. You can operate here. Now, there's no certification requirement. There's no tax requirements. Is that correct? What's your view on that? Because it sounds almost like a free playground, right?
Ramiro, I've been 19 years in classroom teaching taxation. When I hear this, man, it is thrilling to have this in mind. I'll tell you why. Before this law, it was it could be considered a crime for you to operate gambling in Brazil, right? Misdemeanor, but let's say crime to make it easier.
But there was no enforcement before, right?
Okay. Then comes the law in 2018 with the regulation that never came. And then people say, now it's legal. I would say that now it's not a crime. The problem that I see as a tax operator for more than 20 years is everything that is in that law talks about a licensed operation. If you don't have a license, doesn't matter the reason, that's because you never got it, because the government is not issuing, because we don't have a regulation. That tax regime doesn't apply to you, right? So if that tax regime doesn't apply to you, you should be taxed as a normal company. And as a normal company, there is absolutely no guarantee that you are not going to be taxed over your turnover, for example, or the GGR or NGR. There is no guarantee because we only have GGR systems in very specific situations. For example, tax over health insurance. So what is the base of the taxation? Well, it's everything that everybody paid to the health insurance company minus everything that they paid to hospitals, to exams, doctors, whatever. So this is the base, clearly the base. But from my company, for example, I have nothing to deduct as a payment company, right? So if you build your operation in Brazil considering the law that has been approved, perfect, it's not a crime. But nobody can guarantee what is going to be the way our tax authorities are going to interpret your activity and how they're going to put you in our system. You may wake up with a bill of a tax calculator over your turnover. And I don't know how you live with this, right? So, yes, it's right, you can. I just don't think it's worth the risk if you consider all the tax implications that we have being a normal company, not one of those licensed companies that the tax regime, a better tax regime is in that law from 2018.
Well, fortune favors the brave, they say. I mean, Brazil is a very interesting market, but yeah, it's a challenge. You have a law. I mean, they are even allowed to advertise in the main football, soccer shirts right over there. So they have that level of visibility. I
have an interesting story about this.
Yeah.
I have to make it quick. The first advertising in country was led by Luciana, which is coincidentally my sister, but that's true, and NetBet. NetBet wanted to make something big, and we are talking about April, May, June 2018, before the provisional measure, right? So Luciana took the NetBet case to some places, and Maracanã Arena, probably one of the most famous soccer arenas in the world, said, well, I want it. Okay, but there was no law about this. And the way we make it possible was we convinced the board of the legal board of Maracanã that, look, when you see an advertising of Conrad, the hotel in Uruguay, in a Brazilian TV company, that's because they expect that a Brazilian, when travel to Punta del Este, they are going to stay in Conrad instead of staying somewhere else. So when NetBet advertised their brand in Maracanã Stadium, what they expect is that one of those guys, when they go to a jurisdiction where they can place a bet, they are going to use NetBet instead of Bet365, for example.
That's why we need lawyers.
Yes, I hate all of
Creative
them.
lawyers.
But all
That's
in
it.
all,
But this is the reason we advertise in TV. From Maracanã, they went to Fortaleza, then Vasco, and then this is what we see today.
what I wanted to add to all this is, because I see we're kind of
It's moving fast.
which is, I don't know what
And
Niam has done there to the...
Disappeared
What
10
happened?
minutes
Something
from...
changed there.
I think he kind of rushed it, because we're...
Yeah.
But all in all, one thing that I want to say, perhaps as a final consideration already, Ramiro, I'll leave that up to you. But we're not trying to sound negative or pessimistic here, because it's not all doom and gloom, because Brazil is still a very, very strong market. We can see, one thing I can say here as an operator who has managed many B2C operations in Brazil, all operations, if you're doing the right thing, if you're using the right strategy from a market perspective, from a marketing perspective, localization and all that, you're going to make a buck in Brazil, that's for sure. The market's open. There's a high propensity to gamble there as well. Sportsbook is the only legal thing to advertise on a more public place like your Google PPC. Of course, there's agencies that will help you go the other way as well if you want. But the legal thing right now on TV and everything else is sports. But every single operator in Brazil, every single one of them has a casino vertical with RNG game. Crash games are very popular, your mind games as well. But I think irrespective of a regulation, and this is the nice thing for me as an operator, the market is imposing itself. The industry, the sector has been imposing itself. If you look at a fair, I see Fabiola here as well. I see many Brazilians here as well. We had a massive event in Brazil, a huge event in Brazil, and it was surprising. It was impressive. And this is just another sign that irrespective of a regulation or not, the market is evolving. This is, I hope, just another push for the government to wake up from this everlasting sleep that they are and just push this regulation to happen.
I fully agree. It's not a top-down decision. It's a down-top imposition, right?
Yeah, I think that the big element in the room, and I've seen it in every country, and I'm seeing it also in LATAM, is, let's be clear, ours is an underappreciated industry. We as an industry need to do a much better job advertising and communicating our concern about problematic players, our intent to collaborate with tax, to generate jobs, to generate on innovation. Because at the end of the day, if you tax to death hospitals or schools or movies, you'll have people protesting. Normally, you don't see that with gambling because we're not perceived as the great guys, as the good guys in the market. And we need to do something about that. That's on one end. On another end, there's an element of self-control and self-regulation. It's a lot better if we adopt best practices other than having a regulator that's not a friend of the industry coming and regulate us and regulate everything. I always tell my kids, if you put some order in your room, then I don't have to go there. And if I have to go there, it's going to get worse than if you do something decent, right? I don't know if there's any final consideration or if we have any time for any questions, if there's any questions.
After Nian cut the red wire, and I don't know the time.
It stresses.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Brazilian as well. I know you very well. And I have a question regarding the sports betting project that is about to be regulated. Do you think this is fair enough with the small operators, the way it is? Because I've heard a lot about it, and it seems like it's going to be very beneficial for the big operators. But how about the small ones that want to enter in Brazil?
As an operator, for me,
Yes.
it's completely unfair. Completely unfair. Nothing justifies a 30 million reais for sports betting only. I don't know. If someone is positive about that as an operator, I really want to talk to you and find out your ROI plan on that, because it doesn't make sense. How can you invest 30 million reais unless you're a multi-million massive giant, and your question was specific about the small ones. For the small ones, Fabiola, what's going to happen is they're probably going to run a massive black market, just like happened in Mexico. You know, you have the largest guys there, your Caliente, running the show, and then you have a lot of guys just running under the radar there. That's probably what's going to happen, because we're talking 30 million reais, sorry, plus taxing the player on what?
30% on winnings.
Crazy.
That's ridiculous, because they took that from a lottery.
Because they use the word lottery.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I mean, a lottery ticket, the odds are like much, much lower than in a sports betting event. So it just doesn't make sense. It's, in my view, it's all wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, I have 1 minute for a final question. Fabiola, what I heard in Brasilia, one of the walking on those corridors, right, is that we had a strong lobby at the federal government, and I tend to use the word lobby in the best way possible. And then they created the draft that was released, 30 million, highly taxed, tax over the player. And then all of those small operators all over the country, they realized that the entrance barrier was so high that or they could never make it, or they would be pushed to a black market. And then they started complaining like small ants. Well, ants are always small, but the small ants, sorry again, like ants, all over the country. And it brought a kind of wave, a tsunami of complaints to the federal government saying, look, hey, those guys in my small city, they are complaining that they'll never be able to join the market. Well, in that city, you know, we have 5,400 cities. Imagine every operator in one of those cities complaining to the mayor, to the city legislator, to the state legislator, and those complaints arriving at the same time in Brasilia. And then it coincides. We can assure that it's a fact, but it's what I heard there. And when you compare this with the decision of the federal government to not release the provisional measure anymore, it matches, right? The last thing I heard is that maybe the federal government is going to make a provisional measure only for urgent subjects that need to be in place for the regulation comes through, and let, now, if you allow me to use it, they will leave the dirty job to the Congress, because at the Congress, well, the lobby is open, different than at the federal level, right? So then there at the Congress, we will know in which direction it's going to be. But they tend to do something very small, specifically to urgent items needed to the regulation comes through.
I hear you, brother. I hear you.
If I may, a quick phrase. The players are not waiting for regulation. They are already there. They are already playing. And the fact that the operators are not regulated or even illegal doesn't mean that they are not trusted by the players. So if we want to charge 30% on the prices that the players get to play with the new regulated, on top of that, we limit the offering of the operators. And on top of that, we limit the advertising that they can do. I mean, it is what I would do if I wanted to support illegal gambling. You know, so let's be clear about this. We need to leave this aside, and we need to do something that's sustainable. Hopefully the government will listen so that this can grow as an industry.
Absolutely. I was just going to say about Witoldo, I hear you about the little ants part. The small ants, it just means formiguinha, just some Portuguese term for
yes.
Yeah,
in Portuguese makes more sense, yes.
We need to be careful with the Iña thing when you're Argentinian, because we have the camisa and we don't want to continue on that.
But in a way, I'm thankful, Fabiola, that this has become a PM. It gives us a bit more time. I prefer a PL. It gives us a bit more time than just pushing that the way it was, because it's not ideal.
Excellent. I don't know if there's any other question or if we wrap it up. We good? Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Okay,